Good evening and welcome. Respect the classics. Happy Juneteenth. Thanks so much for spending your holiday with me in a basement in North Brooklyn. That's a weird decision that you all made. Be that as it may, we're all here to honor the greats, and we have two of them with us here tonight. Rob Swift and Rasul Mowatt are here. Clap a little bit.
Yeah.
Clap, clap, clap.
Let's go.
Rob Swift, DJ par excellence, stands out for his unique contributions to the art of DJing and hip-hop. His first crowning achievement was winning the DMC East Coast title in 1992. As a founding member of the Executioner DJ crew, he played a pivotal role in shaping DJ culture. Today, Rob has continued his relentless pursuit of fresh directions, expanding his palette into the stratosphere of the academic world and spending his time teaching worldwide. He has taught courses at the New School and is currently the Chief Academic Officer at Brolick Army DJ School. More recently, though, I saw him and Mr. Sinister open up for the Farside in Williamsburg. The Farside were great, but you could tell they were contractually obligated to play for 45 minutes and not a second longer. Rob played for was like 2.5 hours straight.
Felt like it.
It was insane. The man is relentless. Give it up for Rob Swift.
Thank you. And big ups to Mrs. Sinister who performed with me that night.
Rasul Mowatt has been professionally DJing since 1984 under the names Rasul DJ, The Governor, and more recently, The Exile. He began DJing in Chicago and has spun the wheels of steel in New York, Miami, Glasgow, and London. Rasul leads a double life as a college department head and professor at the North Carolina State University. He researches geographies of race, geographies of violence, and animation of public space, and has published numerous articles and books. Rasul teaches and DJs with one focus: what comes from the heart will touch the spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to welcome to the stage Rob Swift and Rasul Mowatt.
Thank you.
All right. Let's figure out the format real quick.
Word.
I'll get the conversation going, and I'm sure you guys have a lot to talk about. I'm going to start with an easy one. What was the first record to get a Respect the Classics reissue that had you asking, am I old?
Wow, that's an interesting question to start this off with. Reissue that merits like Respect the Classics. I'll have to say the reissue of Funky Drummer, James Brown, which I actually have in that black bag right there. Funky Drummer's a staple hip-hop song, specifically the break on Funky Drummer. It's been sampled by the likes of Public Enemy, Cool G Rap. I could go on. And James Brown himself, the legend, rest in peace, is such a important ingredient in hip hop music, especially. So I'd have to say the reissue of Funky Drummer. Rasul?
Yeah, probably just respond to the question as a listener. Probably the reissue of 3 Feet High and Rising, just because I think that was just a time period where, I became probably more conscious of what I wanted to buy and all the formats possible. So vinyl, cassette, at that time it was just those two options. But yeah, just as a listener, because, it went hand in hand with, the whole, some of us are old enough to remember there was those record pool days, the whatever 5 cent, whatever things, in the mail, for the basic LPs, of course, but not, what you would use oftentimes for DJing. But it was a beginning point of sort of buying your own stuff. Yeah.
It's finally legal to stream that record again.
That's
Crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah.
All right. Tell us about the first time you were by yourself on stage with no safety net.
Ooh, that was when I was 12. Basically, my first gig in the gymnasium of IS 145 Junior High School in Jackson Heights, Queens, where I grew up. The principal made an announcement telling the students that we were going to have our GO party on a specific date. I forget when it was, but sure enough, I ran to the principal's office and begged him to let me DJ. And he was like, okay, Rob, you could DJ our GO party. I asked my father, God bless his soul, he passed away in October of 2025 to let me borrow his equipment. And so it was a full circle moment because as a kid, my older brother and my mom and I would help him pack his equipment and transport it to different places throughout New York City. We'd go as far as New Jersey to watch my dad DJ parties. And now I'm asking my dad to let me borrow his equipment, and he helped me pack it up, transport it to the school. And it was just me there in front of this gear. You know, I looked like a pilot in a cockpit, I'm sure, to my classmates, because it was like this young kid that people knew as Robbie Rob, the tagger. I wrote graffiti at that time. No one knew I was a DJ. And then here I am in the gymnasium, no safety net, playing music on analog gear. And anyone knows analog gear is the hardest but most organic way to DJ. And I was 12, and it was, I mean, look at me now. I'm still doing it. And you saw me at Brooklyn Bowl not too long ago, right? So sometimes I pinch myself at the thought that all these years, I was 12, I'm 54 now. So that was what, 42 years of me DJing and doing this crazy thing that we call turntablism. It's awesome. But yeah, that was my first time actually DJing, no help, no safety net, just me and the gear and the music that I brought. And I had a blast, and my classmates had a blast. And obviously, yeah, that just set in motion my entire career as a DJ.
So your first show was a success.
I'd like to say, yeah. I wish I had pictures. But back then, you know, we didn't walk around with smartphones or anything like that. But I have memories.
It was similarly a gym party. I'm from Chicago, so it was house music, right? And, you know, by this particular point, I learned how to sort of beat match, figured out what equipment was best. You know, first equipment I had was belt dry, which is, of course, not supposed to be the one you sort of spin with. And then had some Fisher turntables that had like the pitch control as a little sort of dial on the front. And then eventually I finally got 12. So by the time I got 12s, the person who ran the gym wanted to throw a party, and I was the available DJ to do it for very cheap. And so I came and did it. And the safety net issue is that I had only 4 records. And so luckily, you know, with house music, it wasn't popular or whatever else, like wasn't mainstream. And so every vinyl had, you know, 3 or 4 songs on each side, instrumental, dubs, you know, acapellas. I used every single one in rotation for at least 3 hours. It was Larry Saunders track, Chippy track, Fingers Incorporated, which is Larry Heard track, and Farley. It was a Farley Jack Master Funk album. So these are the 4 albums, literally only 4. And I think amongst the 4, I maybe had 16 individual tracks. Not 16 songs, but the individual tracks. Because, again, some of them were a cappella, some of them were dub, some of them, you know. I don't know how I did it, but I had not learned yet that you needed to stock up on records or whatever else, because still I was quite young, so it's not like I saw parties. And for some of us, you know, in particular, I think it was Shaka Khan's video for I Feel For You that I kind of saw physically what was being done that I was hearing on the radio, right? And that put 2 and 2 together. But you don't see a crate of records, you know, in it. So I didn't know, oh, you're supposed to bring a crate of records. And you need to bring, you know. But, yeah, that was without a safety net. And, you know, people came, they enjoyed it. I don't know about they enjoyed it for the whole 3 hours, but they enjoyed the few minutes that they did not recognize the songs. Yeah.
So you started with house music in Chicago. Tell me, Rob, what musical tradition were you in?
Well, My father immigrated to New York City in 1969 from Chocó, Colombia. And so growing up as a kid, I was listening to a lot of salsa, a lot of merengue, a lot of cumbia, courtesy of my dad's taste. That said, I had an older brother. My brother's about 7 years older than me, and he came up with that first generation of kids immersed in this nameless culture that we now reference as hip hop. So with hip hop, I like to say that it's an amorphous genre of music. The culture itself has no structure, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more later. But to answer your question, because of the lack of structure with regards to hip hop, and my brother being influenced by that first wave of kids immersing themselves in the music, in the dance, in the rap, in the graph, you integrated everything into your experience. So with regards to music, my brother, I have fond memories of him on our days off from school. He would wait till my mom and dad left to go to work. So if they went to work at, let's say, 8:15, at 8:16, he was calling his friends from the town next over to Jackson Heights, which is Corona, Queens. And Jackson Heights, for those New Yorkers that are here, is at the time, and I would say still, had a dense population of Colombian people. So naturally, yeah, we have some Colombianos here. Right, there you go. So being that we grew up in Jackson Heights, we would listen to randomly walking down the street, salsa, merengue, cumbia, playing from people's homes. Corona, I would say from 37th Avenue to Northern Boulevard was predominantly black. And so IS 145 was a combination of kids from Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, which is also has a high Spanish population, Latino population, and Corona and East Elmhurst. East Elmhurst and Corona at the time were predominantly black. So I'm in elementary school, my brother's in junior high school, calling his junior high school friends to bring their parents' record collections over to our house because we had the gear. We had the turntables, the mixers, the tape recorders, the microphones, everything that you needed to make a tape similar to what Grandmaster Flash, Grand Wizard Theodore, Kool Herc. I actually brought some tapes here. You guys could pass them around amongst yourselves. It's 3 tapes, so if I'm missing one, I will come after you. But those tapes that you guys are holding in your hands were the tapes that my brother would study, and then he would invite his friends over from Corona, Queens, to bring their records over to our house because we had the gear, and then they would replicate what you guys are holding in your hands. So they had access to the James Brown that I referenced earlier, the Aretha Franklins, the Bob James records, all the funk and soul that hip-hop DJs like Grandmaster Flash, Grand Wizard Theodore, Africa Bambaataa, Kool Herc, Tony Tone, Charlie Chase, AJ, all those DJs, the songs that they played in those tapes were songs that were being played on the radio, but in the hands of a hip-hop DJ, they become tools for a DJ to use so that someone could rap over these short sections of these records that contained what we call breaks, 8-second long pieces of drums where the band would strip down and you would just hear these drums, and if you had duplicate copies of these songs, you could extend the break part of these songs and someone could rap for as long as you're extending it on 2 turntables. And that's what you guys are holding, the source material for what a hip-hop DJ does with a rapper. And so I would sit in the living room and just watch my brother and his friends engage in this art form that at the time, again, we weren't even calling hip hop. It was just music. And they incorporated everything, to answer your question, Stephen. So let me grab this bag here too, because I brought these records because I knew we were going to talk about this. The beauty of hip hop is it has no real structure. So this album here is a Flash Gordon album. Anyone see the movie Wild Style? Okay, so a few of you. There's a scene, one of my favorite scenes in the movie with Grandmaster Flash, and in his portion of the film, he's scratching songs like Bob James, Take Me to Mardi Gras, Headhunters, God Made Me Funky. The introduction is from this comic book audio album of Flash Gordon. And then I think Scorpio or Keith Cowboy say the grand, master, flash, with the echo chamber, if you want to pass it around, Stephen. So here's the James Brown reissue that I was referencing earlier. So someone there is holding a comic book album. This is a funk album. We have albums like Los Angeles Negros. This is an album that I actually found in my dad's stash. We have ESG, a punk fusion band from the Bronx. There's a song called UFO on here that's a hip hop classic. Dennis Coffey, Scorpio. This is a song that let's say 1975, when this culture, for me, and we could probably talk about it more later, truly started to form. I don't subscribe to the 1973 mythology. For me, this culture started forming, or I should say it was conceived, not birthed yet, but conceived in closer to 1975. But prior to 75, you had Italian DJs like David Mancuso, Francis Grasso, playing songs like Scorpio, courtesy of Dennis Coffey. That's Dennis Coffey there. The reason I reference them is because what I'm trying to say is, in the hands of Francis Grasso, Nicky Ciano, David Mancuso, Italian DJs like that, this is funk jazz. But in my hands, in the hands of my brother and his friends, it becomes a tool to make hip hop. Because the typical DJ, before techniques like scratching, backspinning were birthed, DJs would basically place the needle on the vinyl and then just let the vinyl play and grab a different record. As the song is ending, start mixing in the new song. But what we did was we would take our hand and place it on the record and move it back and forth. And if you had duplicate copies, you could extend the break part of Scorpio, let's say, and someone could rap over. So hip hop, for me, the beauty of it is that it's a culture that grabs and integrates from everything. It doesn't segregate, it doesn't isolate, it doesn't push away, it embraces. And so our music taste, from my brothers as a teenager to mine as an adolescent, was super mixed, is what I'm trying to say. It was eclectic because hip-hop DJs grabbed from everywhere. So long as it had a dope drum break that you could loop, you used it.
I mean, I think, in terms of the questions you were asking about, like kind of, how did we sort of get exposed to music, or what did it do to us with that exposure? And so, although house music was big in Chicago, really for me it starts, similarly, my father's from Jamaica, and but he's from a generation prior to Roots. So he's part of the Calypso era. And so Calypso records were always being played. And then my brother didn't DJ, but he bought a lot of records, and some of the records he bought were Parliament records and Funkadelic records, which in and of themselves would attract a person to read, look at the record, study the record, so very early on, you become interested in the music in all types of ways. Who's on the drums, who's on the guitar, because you're reading the whole album. Once it got to the point of me DJing, and starting, and coming from that sort of era of being open to so many different types of music. For example, for those of us in Chicago, ESG, Stand in Line was the track that we would use for house music, right? So it had multi sort of usage, or wasn't relevant to a lot of different art forms and culture that was developing. But in Chicago, you literally had to go across the entire city to even build an actual sort of collection of records. So while there was a record store maybe 2 blocks away from where I lived that had, probably insufficient number of records, there was Dr. Wax in Chicago, in Hyde Park, that, you could buy a lot of maybe 12 inches that you heard on the radio. Then there was import records, and as the name implies, this is a record store that exclusively sold German, Japanese versions of all types of music, of course at a high premium, right? Trax Records was not too far away from there in terms of downtown. And then on the north side, you started to have gramophone records that, you were able to purchase a lot of different types of music. So even though I wasn't then DJing hip hop at that time, you could buy a lot of hip hop, a lot of 12 inches, not just the album versions. But I think why I'm bringing that up is that movement around the city, the driving around the city, went hand in hand with sort of learning the music. So I was learning the very city that I was living in, going from one place to another, different neighborhoods, different types of population who would go in and buy records from those particular stores. And then similarly, once I started doing venues, also noticing the different sort of neighborhoods and locations in the city of Chicago that I would have to sort of venture to, So on a Saturday, I would probably start at 12 and go to about 6 o'clock, because that's how long it would take to drive all these particular miles just to buy records for a gig that starts at 9 p.m., right? And so you're just gone for the entire day, but you're going all over the city. Of course, luckily, gas was cheaper at that time. But I think that exposure is just what I wanted to kind of emphasize, but also the traveling, because, of course, with our book, we really sort of emphasize the notion that the city itself is what actually produces hip-hop during the particular time period that it came about, the circumstances that were there in the city all throughout each borough.
Well, you really keyed up this next question amazingly well. So the book argues that hip-hop is a socio-political reaction that created an alternate reality within a geographical specificity. Rasul, you are a professor. I am not. I don't understand the words I just said. Can you tell me what it was about the cultural and political landscape of the 70s that made me say those words?
Yeah. Such words, right? Well, first I have to acknowledge, Rob and I's collaboration was relatively long, overdue, collaborate over what, we had no idea what. But once I heard an interview that he did with DJ B-Man, who's out of Charlotte, and in that interview he did with B-Man, he talked about benign neglect, which was an unofficial policy that started from the federal level and trickled all the way down into the local cities. And once I heard that, I kind of knew, I finally had a sort of idea of how we could collaborate, because I had already been starting to do histories of New York in general, but not specific to hip hop. And so then that's why we, when we met, and then we sort of mapped out potentially what could become the book, because he had already started to write some things specifically to sort of the development of DJ culture and its contribution to overall hip hop. And so once I kind of had that notion of benign neglect, it was allowed me to sort of look into that, but then go backwards as well as forwards using that sort of entry point. And what I ended up coming across that I constantly sort of shared with Rob was just this notion that it was clear that what we needed to sort of put out there as a book had little to do with our fandom or appreciation for the music, and more so the circumstances of the city that really cultivated hip hop. And when I say cultivated, it didn't do it like because it wanted to. It did it because it isolated communities, it dispossessed people, it displaced them constantly. And it just happened to be during the 70s that the displacement started to settle. So people weren't being moved around as much because there was a particular law that came into place in the 50s called Mitchell-Lama. And that particular act made it so that New York, which is a unique city, had rent control. And they've been still trying to like eat away at Mitchell-Lama, but most of the buildings that you see in the city that are classified as public housing are Mitchell-Lama mixed, income and rent control, which is actually the building that Kool Herc was in. He was in a Mitchell-Lama building. But that type of legislation ended up kicking in the mid 60s to set up in the 70s so that a household would not have to sort of leave Brooklyn again to go to Queens, or go to Queens and go to the Bronx. Now they could at least have a generation in the house or in the apartment or the unit that they were living in. So that's kind of does that kind of make sense as what is trying to be said there? Yeah. But there's a lot more to that, but yeah.
What was the research process for the book like? How did the book really come about? You said that Rob had already started writing. How did you guys decide to work together, and how did you work up the ambition to tell this story?
So there are parts of the answer to that question that might be uncomfortable for you guys, but I'm just going to be honest and blunt. Then there are other parts of the answer to that question that I feel Rasul plays a super important role in. First thing that comes to mind that I want to say is, when I think about what research went into it, what I want to say is I lived a lot of what I talked about in the book. So it wasn't a thing where like I had to sit down and do research. A lot of what I talk about are just personal experiences that I had as a adolescent, watching his older brother again come up with that first generation of hip hop kids. And again, at the time, it was a nameless culture that was growing that they didn't even realize was growing. Another part to the answer is that I went to college, right? I went to Baruch College. I started going to college in 1991. I graduated in 1990, enrolled in Baruch. Actually couldn't afford to go to college, so I just took out student loans and put myself through school because that's what my parents wanted me to do, to be honest with you. I wanted to DJ. I wanted to tour. I wanted to DJ for a rapper. I wanted to enter DJ competitions. And I did it. But I went to school at the same time to fulfill this dream that more so my dad had. The reason he came to New York City, the reason my father immigrated to New York City was to create and facilitate a pathway for his family. It wasn't even for him. He was just the first ripple, right, in the ocean. And he got himself established from 69 to 71. Sent from my mom and my older brother that were in Colombia in 71. They had me in 1972. So I was the first American born in the entire Aguilar family. So I felt compelled to go to school because my dad made that sacrifice, right? And I had an older brother that, to be honest with you, was going in the wrong direction, right? And this is where it kind of gets uncomfortable. Like, I grew up in a very poor part of Jackson Heights. And we lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a tenement building, rats and roaches for roommates. I remember vividly sleeping on cots in the living room. And in the morning, my brother and I would fold the cots up and move them to the corner of the living room. Yeah, so we grew up super poor, right? So I knew I needed to go to college to fulfill my dad's dream of having children that were educated, and feeling the pressure to go, in addition to my father's expectations, was having an older brother that was running in gangs. The precursor to hip-hop culture is gang culture. The kids that were on those tapes that you guys were holding in your hands, scratching, backspinning, and rapping, previously to that, a lot of them were in actual gangs. And my brother was one of those kids. So again, feeling that pressure to do the right thing and make my parents happy, I went to school. And the point that I'm trying to make is that in school, in college specifically, I took Black Studies courses. So I started learning about inner cities. I started discovering things about the way I grew up that were political, that weren't really in my scope of understanding as a teenager. So now that I'm in school, in college, I'm sort of starting to connect the dots. And I'm like, this is why the Bronx looked the way it looked. I'm learning things about benign neglect, right? And recording all of that and applying it to why the Bronx, specifically the home of hip hop, looked like a war zone. Things started to make sense to me. So what I learned at Baruch College, courtesy of my Black Studies teachers, just stayed with me. And fast forward to 2021, just as the pandemic lockdown started to end, I started noticing a narrative on social media, courtesy of, I don't want to promote them, I'll just say factions of groups of people that subscribe to nationalistic ideology, ethnocentrism, my race is better than your race kind of thing. Started noticing these narratives on social media that were going against and contradicting how I grew up, what I lived. As I told you, I lived this culture since I was basically 8 years old. 1979 is when I first started breaking, courtesy of my brother. So I know what this culture is, and fast forward to 2021, I'm reading things like hip-hop started with black people first, and no other races were there, and all these things, right? So at first, I'm like, all right, these are hip-hop nerds that don't understand what the culture is about, so let me correct them. So you know how social media works, right, guys? You start arguing with someone on social media, before you know it, 6 hours have gone by. You're arguing with the same person, right? But what I was noticing was that there were times also where I would get into a debate with someone, and then within 5 minutes, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, I kid you not, are attacking me on, let's say, Twitter, all kind of like together, like this uniform assault on something that I had to say that disagreed with this one person, right? So I'm like, what's going on here? Like, this is weird to me. And a friend of mine named Tamika called me one day, and she was like, Rob, you realize you're not arguing with hip hop heads, right? And I was like, well, what do you mean? She was like, you're arguing with nationalists, ethnocentrists, people that believe that the black race is the indigenous race to America, that this country started with them, on and on and on. And I'm like, oh, this is something else going on. And then I started learning about the people that led these groups and understanding the fact that they were basically co-opting hip-hop culture and attempting to lump it into this reparations argument or plight. And so I got alarmed because it wasn't just this ideology that was living on social media. I started seeing my heroes, my OGs of hip hop, people that I look up to, sitting with influencers from these different groups for interviews and allowing themselves and their stories to be hijacked and polluted and used to amplify this angle that these people are trying to like hustle, right? So I'm trying to figure out ways to say it without naming people. So, but I think you guys know what I'm trying to say. And so once I got hip to that, and my friend Tamika explained to me what was going on when I was arguing with these people, that it wasn't just hip hop heads, it was people that aren't even from New York, from the South, let's say, that maybe bought a Tupac album, right? And now they think that they're authorities on hip hop because of the color of their skin. And this is where it really got bizarro for me. I'm engaging one guy on X, and he turns around and calls me a filthy Latino because I wear, you guys see I have a Colombian soccer jersey on. Like, I'm not bashful about letting people know that, yes, I'm black, but my parents are from Colombia. And so I was just like dumbfounded because, I mean, I've never even had a white person call me filthy Latino, let alone a black person. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book. Because, I just felt like I have an online DJ school called Brolic Army DJ School. And my students are straight, gay, trans, black, white, Asian, European, American, Canadian, Australian. I teach everyone, right? Because hip hop integrates. It doesn't segregate. And so students would DM me, students would text me, students would call me and be like, Rob, I saw this argument that you had with this person on Twitter. Do I not belong to this culture anymore? Right? And that bothered me as well. And so I was like, I want to write a book that by no means am I trying to say that my perspective is the perspective. It's a perspective on this culture, and it's a valid one, right? And so I wanted to write a book to just offset the craziness that I was seeing on social media. So I started writing it, and there came a point where I was just like, all right, I'm great at writing 30-page papers, right? I'll write you a really cool caption on social media, but is this following the proper protocol for a book? And that's when I reached out to Rasul, and I was like, bro, please help me finish this because I don't know if I'm doing this right. And thankfully, Rasul joined me on this journey, and the City of Hip Hop was born.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think just simply research is a way to sort of get information that a person needs using an approach that best serves getting that information, just as a non-complicated way to sort of explain it. Good, sometimes there's some confusion on what's good and bad research. And so oftentimes you have to ask yourself with research, are you trying to prove yourself right or are you trying to prove yourself wrong? And so good research oftentimes is fueled by being able to prove yourself wrong. Can you find the whole, the thing that you're saying that is off, that you have no justification for? And so at least that's the approach that, I took, in relationship to, so much of, the sort of content and sources that were sort of applied to this. And so that involved, getting sort of archive-based images, archive-based documents, looking at laws and acts that were sort of passed. But it wasn't just like I knew to go to a law and act. You had to keep sort of going down each rabbit hole, right? And sometimes you would circle back because it was a dead end, and sometimes you would keep going back because you're trying to answer the question, where did this culture come from? And not from necessarily interviews with people, because of course interviews with people could be so unreliable, right? While it may sort of convey their feelings and how their perspective, it's not necessarily exactly what is there, and you can't corroborate what they said as actual fact. But we could corroborate where things are physically at, where things physically occurred, right? And so, so that's why it was so useful to sort of think about this through the city and the infrastructure of the city. And so, inside a lot of the stories that people are conveying, both in terms of interviews, but also in terms of tracks. They're talking about rides in the subway to one part of New York to another. They're talking about specific studios. They're talking about friends and so forth that they had in public schools that they attended. So, and so what opened up the doorway was that all the other books on hip hop, which I had to sort of also read, and there's a lot of not so good books. But that's probably putting it lightly. So there's books that are called hip hop pedagogy. There's books that claim to be about hip hop. And when I say hip hop more broadly, I'm not talking about the books that are specifically about DJing, books that are specifically about b-boy, b-girl. Like, I'm not talking about those books. But what ended up happening was that when you open up those books, you oftentimes sort of see just a fan writing, right? Regardless of how old they are. They talk about their top 5, these types of things, right? Hip-hop pedagogy, most of it always boiled down to, you have to embody hip-hop culture, and that's attitude, right? And I'm like, that makes no sense whatsoever. That's kind of a complete disrespect to all of these years of people being kicked out of, buildings and so forth. Like, if you're acknowledging that, then you need to sort of stay on that particular topic. And so, so after sort of also reading all those particular books, it was clear that what they were mentioning separately or second was actually the real thing, right? The real thing were these housing projects. The real thing were these subways. The real thing were the policing that occurred. That's not a secondary thing. That's actually the primary thing that results in gangs becoming, peaceful because they don't want to die, right? And they didn't want to die because basically the city completely left them to their own vices and completely sort of cut off services to parts of the city, right? So again, for me, getting that information is about trying to do good research. And again, good research is just about trying to prove yourself wrong. And for the most part, what we, at least what I feel is what we end up having in the book is something that, one, is unique. It's not talked about in this particular way, and it's hard to prove wrong.
That's great. I may as well have 100 more questions, but I'm just going to ask one. The book is enjoy the game.
Real quick, wait, I got to give a shout to Noel leaving. Noel helped us out with the book and contributed some important pictures of the executioners in the epilogue section of the book. Noel, it was a great seeing you, girl.
We thank you so much.
Take care. Right on. Thank you. Love you.
All right, last question, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. So the book is heavily steeped in the history of activism and the movement, and even hacktivism, like more modern stuff. Where do you find hope for today and in creating positive change in the world?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, at first, I think just talking about the context for that question, which is what you mentioned in the book, which plays a huge part, right? Why do we have gangs, and why do we have very young membered gangs that end up forming hip hop? Well, two particular sort of older bodies of people were being heavily policed. You had the Panthers, who had been going through numerous years of a false trial around claims that they were going to bomb the Statue of Liberty, which there was no evidence of. And then the Young Lords themselves were being hounded. And so once both of those groups were off the table, there was no longer like mentorship in most of the neighborhoods of the city. So we're talking about literally from 67 to about 71. So 71 is when the Panther trial finally is resolved. And then the Young Lords, they began to sort of have their faction split in the middle of the 70s because some wanted to move towards Puerto Rican independence and some wanted to sort of deal with the state of people in New York, Chicago, and so forth. And so having them off the books was huge. One of the things we covered in the book is the Harlem Cultural Festival that, of course, Questlove did an entire documentary on. But the other side of that whole documentary is the fact that, Mayor Lindsay is trying to, be reelected. And so he's using the concert. That's why the concert exists. He's funding it to get a black base to vote for him. The acts are purposely non-political. If you look at the lineup, you don't see any Gil Scott-Heron, you don't see any Last Poets. So they intentionally sort of kept it away. In fact, one of the groups that was accused of being too political, which was Sly and the Family Stone, the police department removed themselves as police security for the entire event because they refused to do security for Sly and the Family Stone. So they literally leave the park. And so the remaining Panthers had to then finally be called to actually secure the park, even though most of their membership was locked up. So I'm saying that context plays a huge part. I'm not saying it would have completely solved some of the issues, but I think you would not have this many gangs and the gangs with that young of an age if you didn't have the 20-year-olds, the 19-year-olds, the 25-year-olds, just under 30-year-olds gone, right? And then, of course, you have the increase of population in Rikers, the Tombs, Attica, and so forth, all during this time period. So I'm just sort of kind of clarifying and providing that context because I know many people are going to buy the book or have already read the book, and that's an importance of a thing that is a part of the confluence that makes the 70s so important for the formation of hip-hop, specifically in New York. Why it couldn't be in Atlanta, why it couldn't be in Jackson and all these other type of places. There's a number of things tied to immigrant populations coming here. There's a lot of things in relationship to settling a displacement, removing the political, liberation movements out of the communities, the construction of expressways. These are all happening. The city goes bankrupt during this time period. You had changing of the mayor guard from Lindsay to A. Beam. So all these things are happening only in New York. And so only in New York could you have something that would eventually be called hip-hop. Because, we can argue all day about where's the origin of whatever, coming from. But those things did not come together except in New York during this time period. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? And that's the kind of core part of, I think, what we're trying to, convey in this is that if it's a culture argument, one, it's hard to sort of, make that claim, but also two, cultures always influence each other. So where does it start? Where does it end? You can't sort of, you can't break that down. Is MCing tied to some of the old 40s or 50s scatting down in the South, or is it from the calypso MCs battling? Is breakdancing from someplace in West Africa, or is it from the dance battles in the park between Irish and enslaved black populations, in D.C., Washington Park in particular? So I'm just saying, setting that stage up while also avoiding the part about the present day. And I think, the present day, hopefully, I think within the book, because we also really don't get into the present day too much with the book, but the book does three things. One, it provides not only the text of what we came up with, but it also has all those images that has its own story, and it has then all these sources that people can find on themselves. And I think what I can at least say about moving forward and what could be hopeful is that by providing people with ways to get their own answers, they could come to a better appreciation. Because some of the very populations that Rob is speaking of, they haven't produced a book.
They live online.
And so exactly. So it's like they're not mentioned in the book because they didn't do anything. Until they want to do research, then it's not relevant to sort of give them that amount of weight. But there's other sort of groups of people too who have commandeered hip hop, in surprising ways as well, right? Especially remember the 50th anniversary, because we had conversations all around that where it was an entire year of questionable emphasis and lack of emphasis on what is the culture and what is not the culture. It ended up being very much about the MCs of certain sort of favorite artists. No DJing.
Who did what first.
Yeah, exactly.
And what the City of Hip Hop is attempting to do is interrogate why they did what they did, opposed to who did what first. What makes a 12-year-old kid like Grand Wizard Theodore Livingston, grab a jazz album, Bob James 2, and decide to put his hand on the record and move it back and forth, opposed to picking up a guitar or a drum kit and drumsticks? What makes a graffiti writer like Tracy 168 take a spray can to a wall or to a train? What makes a Puerto Rican and a black youth in Jimmy D and Jimmy Lee start Rocksteady Crew, the most influential b-boy crew, breaking crew ever in the world, started by a Puerto Rican and a black American? These are the questions that we interrogate in the book. Why did hip hop become, opposed to who did what first? And that's what Hip Hop 50 became. And for me, it was frustrating because as a nerd, right, someone that went to school and started learning about the policies that informed a lot of the laws and bylaws that affected these poor black and brown people in the Bronx, and you could even sprinkle in some white people. The Bronx before the 1970s and the 60s was predominantly Jewish, Polish, and Irish. And a lot of those Jewish, Polish, and Irish people that couldn't leave, couldn't take part in white flight when immigrant families from the Caribbean and Central America and South America, along with black Americans from the South, started migrating up to New York City and settle in the Bronx. A lot of those white families that didn't have the money to take the racist roads, courtesy of Robert Moses, up to Westchester or out to Long Island, a lot of those people stayed. And those people gave birth to the Tracy 168s, the Taki 183s, the Mr. Freezes. This is white hip hop royalty. And I feel silly even referencing the color of their skin, but I feel like I almost have to these days, because if you go on social media, you think, depending on what your algorithms are like, you think that hip hop is black culture. and it isn't. It's a counterculture. Hip hop is a counterculture that kids gravitate to, that want to say I am through dance, through art, through spoken word, through music, a la DJing. And so these are the things, yes, that we talk about in the book. And as Rasul said, it's not the kind of book that you're going to buy if you're interested in knowing what the top selling album was in 1981. Like, we don't talk about those kind of surface, frivolous hip hop anecdotes. Like, we really get into the meat and bones of like what created the space for this culture to grow. I like to say that the Bronx, New York, in the 1970s was like a petri dish. So when you put in redlining, when you put in memos like Benign Neglect, courtesy of Patrick Moynihan, when you put in racist roads like the Cross Bronx Expressway and the Southern State Parkway, roads that allowed upper class or well-to-do white families to leave places like the Bronx because in their eyes it was becoming infested with like black and brown people. When you factor all that in, defunding the fire department, the police, gang culture, all that is what created the space for this culture to grow that now isn't in the control of the kids who started it. The ones controlling the industry part of it live in beautiful houses and don't come from where I come from. You know what I mean? So it's important to touch on those things because today, with the way news just moves so fast, it's easy to forget that this culture comes from lack, right? Lack and circumstances that were super challenging.
And I mean, I think the element of writing, graffiti is probably the one that has sort of retained so much of its core. Still to this day, it's still, I'm not talking about street art. I'm talking about, actual graffiti. It's still doing the same purpose, which is, staking a particular point onto a piece of property, oftentimes in criticism of either that neighborhood situation or the city in which it's living in. These things become a canvas, but they also become an argument point. And so it still is one of the ones, but that's interesting. It's one of the ones that 50th anniversary had no discussion on. Not even a flash of a montage of images. It had no reference to it. But another particular, I think, thing that to mention too, that we actually mentioned in the book is that Kool Herc has been a long time advocate of trying to retain Mitchell Lama. Mitchell Lama are the two senators that put forward the act back in the 50s. And so we have two images from the housing unit that he was in that he's been trying to prevent it from going privatized. A multimillionaire has been trying to buy that property and, of course, get rid of, sort of that rent control. And at least for a moment of time, Chuck Schumer was able to support Kool Herc to sort of prevent that. I'm not sure where it is in 2025, but at least at the time of the book, they were able to halt that sort of purchase of that particular property. But here it is in the 50th anniversary, and none of that is even mentioned, right? That the fact that these sites and so on that are a part of hip hop culture aren't even important, aren't even preserved. There's no historical marker, at these locations anywhere, right? And so I just want to kind of mention that in there. But again, there's two images that are more in the present day with Kool Herc's efforts with trying to do that.
Well, let me turn it over to the audience. Does anybody have any questions?
Could we get him on the mic?
Absolutely.
Is the cord long enough? Yeah, I think it is. Perfect.
Well, first of all, we just walked in. We kind of just learned as we went to understand, the topic, and I'm Colombian. Also, I live in Queens.
What part?
I'm in Woodside.
Nice.
Woodside.
What's up, neighbor?
So I'm a drummer, musician, producer, and the music by James Brown has shaped hip hop and has been the most sample beat, funky drummer, right? But I'm curious to hear from you, Rob, your experience. You're from Colombia, from Choco, which is part of Colombia that is mostly African descendant.
Yes.
So I'm curious to hear how has that shaped and contributed to what you have done within the music that you work in, the culture you are involved in.
That's a great question. I'd say my dad's love for music, his willingness to learn how to become a DJ because he wanted to make extra money to support his family, had a huge impact on me because, for one, I think my dad passed on his love for music onto me, right? I have vivid images of my father in a wife beater after eating dinner, standing next to his turntable and just testing out music in his headphones. And he's just zen, like just super peaceful and not there in the living room, somewhere else. I could tell that he's somewhere else in his mind as he's testing out all these new records that he might have purchased throughout the week that he wants to play at his next party. He passed that love for music onto me. And I think as a Colombian, the thing that I feel I try to integrate into what I do as a DJ is just that, I don't know how to explain it, but that love for your people, that connection to your people. As a Colombian, I'm sure that you understand what I'm trying to say. Being here in this city that we call New York, you still feel connected to Colombia. And so I try to do that with my music. There's a song on an album, a solo album that I released in 2002 called Sound Event. And on that album, I have a song called Salsa Scratch. And you could YouTube it after you leave, right? And at the beginning of the song, I have my mom speaking in Spanish, introducing the track. So she introduces the track, and it's a salsa record through the eyes of a DJ. So everything that you hear sonically in that song was scratched in on a turntable. So I took pieces of salsa records, bass lines. I had Bob James, this guy right here on the back of this cover. You can pass that around. Play piano on the song. A colleague of mine and friend named D Styles from the Bay Area in California helped me out with some scratches. And it's a salsa record through the lens of a scratch turntablist DJ. And so my love, my connection to Colombia was passed on to me from my parents. And that's something that I try to integrate into my music whenever I can, or even in interviews, talking about my connection to Colombia and to the people down there. Because America is a beautiful place because it's an amalgam of people from different places. That's what makes this country so amazing, right? We are all immigrants. We all come from somewhere else. Even those that are born here, if you trace back their lineage, you come from somewhere else. And so, unless you're native, right, to this country. But otherwise, that to me is the best way I can answer that question, right? Like I try to just capture the love for my country and my ethnicity that was taught to me from my parents in my music and how I present it as well. Word. Thank you.
We have time for two more. Dos Mas, anybody? Yeah.
Hello, hello. Yeah, what's up, Rob?
What's up?
I'm a third generation b-boy. I grew up right here in Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn.
If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 48.
Okay, dope.
In the 90s, because of my homies that taught me how to break. Because there was a lot of crews in Williamsburg and Greenpoint. They were like b-boy crews. People don't understand that. Like people actually thought that everything went down in the Bronx. But these neighborhoods were serious about their b-boying because of the language, like people coming in from Manhattan, probably going to school. And I had the privilege of hanging out with a lot of like Zulu kings, like serious Zulu king guys. And I used to sit around and talk to them like when I was like really young. And the question, and it was, nobody ever said, this person started this person started this at this time. It was always the same question. It was like, this person contributed to this person contributed to this. Nobody questioned it. Nobody questioned it until probably like a couple of years ago. Probably nobody even questioned that until Zulu had that beef with Herc. And they started beefing on when this didn't start.
What was that, 2017-ish?
Yeah, and it went on YouTube and it got knocked down, right? Like it got taken down from YouTube. So Rocksteady and Zulu were like arguing with Herc, and Herc is like, no, this started in 73. And Zulu's like, nah, it didn't start in 73. So the argument, but I remember when I was chilling next to one guy, his name was Lucky Strike. Lucky Strike, original Zulu king.
Yep.
He passed away.
Rest in peace.
And power to him. And I remember asking him, and he goes, actually, no, Herc was doing this at this time, and Bam was doing this on this time. And that was it. Like, everybody was two different neighborhoods, every kind of respected each other. But I remember asking these brothers these questions, and it was always the same thing. Like, it was, nobody questioned who did what. It was more like, this is what they contributed to the system. And that's what I like about your book. Like, you're actually breaking down, you're actually answering that question. I didn't really get too much reading your book, but growing up in this culture and hanging out with these OGs, I kind of like understand exactly what your book is, And I also want to say too, like as a b-boy, growing up, the only like rap music is one thing, but b-boy culture and the graffiti culture, the dance culture, is the most united culture in the world. You can go to anywhere in this planet, and you walk in a room, and you will meet a b-boy, don't know the language, but that person will give you the most love in the world. I've been to almost every country. I hung out with b-boys that we don't know each other's language, but we understand the music. And also dancers, house dancers too, techno dancers. Same thing. Like, that's the universal love of this culture, comes from the art itself, not just rap music. Rap, you can't really like, not everybody can rap, but like, like the music changes and rap music is a little bit more universal, but at the end of the day, the culture itself, what I see is the unity behind it because everybody accepts it and becomes a part of the culture. So, that's something really big,
Something that you said that I wanted to touch on. It's a couple of things you said that I think were super important. One thing that stands out to me is this whole thing that took place, which some of you guys may not be aware of. I want to say it was like 2016, 2017, where Bam and Herc got into this argument over when hip hop started, right? I laugh. I don't mean to laugh like and be disrespectful, but it's just funny because seeing it play out, it speaks to what Rasul was referencing earlier regarding how Hip Hop 50 sort of polluted the culture from a historical timeline perspective. As we started to get closer to Hip Hop 50, and it's like 2017, 2018, the OGs are now aware of this milestone anniversary that's coming up because journalists and platforms are coming to them asking and wanting to know, well, how did this culture start? Who started it? When did it start? So a lot of these OGs, there's really no other way to put it, started centering the history, or I should say started putting themselves at the center of the history. And so you had Herc saying, well, it started in 1973 at 1520 Cedric Avenue on August 11th, right? And then Bam is like, well, I can't let Herc, I'm speaking for Bam, and rest in peace, he died, right? But it's like the way it looks to me when this was playing out in 2017-ish, it was almost like Bam was like, well, I can't let Herc take the credit for starting this. So I'm going to have to say that Zulu Nation also started in 1973. Here's the thing about that. And this is why books are important, like putting things down in print, because that's it. It's in print. You have it right there. You could always reference information, right? And when it comes to hip hop, the OGs did a very poor job of logging this timeline that so much of us are arguing over now in 2026. Herc says hip hop started in 1973, August 11th, at 1520 Cedric Avenue. But if you listen to interviews of first generation Zulu kings, the breakers from Zulu that you referenced in what you said earlier, one in particular, a guy named Charlie Rock, you could YouTube his interviews. Super well-spoken OG. He'll tell you, we started breaking at Kool Herc parties in 1975. He doesn't say 1973. He says 1975. Google, all of you guys, when you leave here, Google Africa Bambaataa East Village Eye. This was a paper that was the equivalent to the Village Voice. And I'm sure the information will pop up for you. Africa Bambaataa is interviewed by Michael Holman. Michael Holman was the guy that managed the New York City Breakers, which were called the Floor Masters before they changed their name for commercial reasons. The New York City Breakers were the Bronx Rockers in the movie Beat Street. You guys, anyone here see the movie Beat Street? No? Watch it if you haven't. It's a really dope hip-hop film. It came out after Wild Style. So in the movie Beat Street, there's this breaking crew called the Bronx Rockers, and Michael Holman used to manage them. So Michael Holman was in the scene, getting involved in what was happening in this culture that we call hip-hop, interviews Africa Bambaataa, and he asks Africa Bambaataa, when did you start Zulu Nation? Africa Bambaataa says 1975. I have the article in my phone if you want to look at it after this book talk. So in 1982, in the East Village Eye, Africa Bambaataa has gone on record as saying Zulu Nation, which is the spirit of hip-hop, started in 1975. You watch any interview with Charlie Rock, an original first-generation Zulu king, on YouTube, he'll say, we started breaking at Kool Herc parties in 1975. But in 2017, Bam and Herc are arguing over which year hip-hop started and who started it. So they kept pushing back the years, and it got to 1973. And it's just like a joke in a way, because you guys went on record, at least Bam did, went on record and said Zulu Nation starts in 1975. And to kind of bring this back to the book, The City of Hip Hop, what Rasul and I argue is that hip hop is not what most people think it is. It's the synergy between two or more of the elements of hip hop. You have breaking, DJing, graffiti, and MCing. So it's the synergy that takes place between two or more elements. Why is that? Well, I referenced earlier when we first started this book talk, DJs like David Mancuso, Francis Grasso, Nicky Siano. They were all DJs playing the same exact palette of records that I passed around. All this music that I have here, Mancuso, Siano, Grasso were playing in discos. So why aren't they considered hip-hop DJs? If hip-hop DJing is just playing a record that's funk or soul. So if you're just playing James Brown, you're a hip-hop DJ. Do you scratch?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm bad at it.
But you're bad at it?
Yeah.
Right. So you're not a scratcher.
I wouldn't go
Right?
with that.
So then if I give you this record by Booker T and the MGs, right? The song here that hip hop DJs like to play is called Melting Pot. So if I give you this song, in your hands, it's a jazz record.
Yeah.
In my hands, it becomes a hip hop record because of what I do to the record, how I manipulate the record. That's what makes it hip hop. And there were no DJs in the early 70s, pre 1975, scratching. Google any interview or YouTube search any interview with Grand Wizard Theodore, the person that we all credit for inventing, quote unquote, scratching. He'll tell you, I was 12 years old when I invented scratching. His mom burst into his room as he was making a mixtape. He was being yelled at, so he got distracted and didn't feel or realize that his hands were still moving as his mom was yelling at him. This is the story that he gives in every interview, right? So when he finished the tape, listen back to it, he got to the part where his mom barged in, and he didn't stop the tape. He kept recording, and he heard himself cueing a song back and forth over the music. So it was happening out of the speakers, not in his headphones. Heard it and decided, that sounds cool. I'm gonna, instead of cueing the song before I drop it in my headphones and then dropping the song, I'm gonna start cueing, moving the record back and forth, i.e. scratching, which is what we call it now, so that the audience hears me. So it's like I'm adding an extra element to the music, me moving the sound that I have queued up on the next song back and forth, and then dropping. He says that he started doing it. What year? 1975. So all these guys keep referencing 1975 as their start point for either Zulu Nation, the start point for when the synergy between the breaker and the DJ started happening, 1975. 1975 as being the year that scratching started to become a thing. I say become a thing and not necessarily created, because every DJ before Theodore would cue up a song and sort of move the record back and forth until that DJ had the song cued perfectly to the spot that he wanted to release. So technically, scratching already existed. It was just that Theodore was the DJ that had the wherewithal to say, I'm gonna let my audience hear me do that or make that sound when I move the record back and forth in cue. 75 is the year that they all reference. So to your point, in wrapping up, that's why, like, I've been just sort of, I don't want to say contradicting what the OGs are saying, but just offering this other perspective, because it's in print, it's in interviews, you guys could see it for yourselves, and it's like, so why are we all just subscribing to this one day as being the birth of this complex culture? It's just silly to me, but it's also hip hop. We do stupid stuff like that, you know what I mean? And it's like, you can't really put a date to when a culture like hip hop starts. It's an amalgam of different experiences. It was shaped over time, over a period of time. I like to say like about 7 to 8 years, from like 75 to like 82. And in 82, when Africa Bambaataa did a different interview with The Village Voice, the journalist of that interview was a guy named Stephen Hager. That's where the media started to term the culture hip hop. So for me, hip hop was conceived in 75, not 73, and it was birthed in, I'd say, 1982. That's when you had the four elements, and we all, us hip hop heads, had a consensus that thanks to Africa Bambaataa, who decided to corral the elements together and put it under this one umbrella, hip hop. That's when all the heads, all the practitioners of the culture decided, all right, this is what the culture is. It's a amalgam of these four pillars that hold it all together. And to Rasul's point of view, or to Rasul's point, by the time Hip Hop 50 came, 2023, only one element was celebrated, and it was rapping. And so I feel like the City of Hip Hop does a good job of not just talking about every element. Every chapter is dedicated to one specific element, but again, the circumstances in New York City, specifically the Bronx, that created the space for this book to get written now.
Before the next question, the book also emphasizes December 8th, 1971, as an important date. Why is that an important date? Because that's the peace meeting between all of these gangs at the Hoe Avenue Boys and Girls Club. So while there's no music being played, there's nobody, breaking there, there's no writing on the walls there, the peace meeting then sets up ways in which those gangs decided to maintain the peace, which was parties. And at those parties are then the ability for these already existing elements to sort of, take shape or be present all in one place. Also, the peace meeting allowed people to travel from one borough to another without being killed, which was highly dangerous, prior to the peace meeting. So if there's any date that is important, we wanted to elevate December 8th, 1971.
Word.
And that also sort of emphasizes, no culture can be pinned down in terms of when something starts and who started it. Right? When we think about jazz, New Orleans, Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, and New York all have claims to contributing to jazz. When, where, we have no idea, right? I mean, we can sort of look at then other evidence of things, specifically with jazz, when all of these sailors would sell their, equipment, all of their, band equipment to gamble and also, try to pay for sex work, right? And they would sell it to pawn shops, and the pawn shops kept those equipment because most of the people lost their money. And then all of the black population, specifically that was working in New Orleans at the hotels and so forth, bought low price equipment. We do know that, but we can't sort of say that that's the beginning of jazz. We just know that's the beginning of a lot of people possessing a lot of brass, instruments, right, and drum sets and so forth. We don't know when ragtime ends and blues starts. We don't know when blues ends and jazz starts, right? And so it's a, I mean, as you were saying, like it's a not necessarily irrelevant sort of argument, but it's an argument that you will never be able to, pin down, and no one should actually pin down. It's more important to sort of allow all the stories to, breathe, but look a little bit more deeply than just about like what this person says, what did this person do, and where did they do it. I know Rob mentioned Mancuso and so forth. That's an important sort of element about it, and it also shows that DJing was, of course, existing before it still does exist before it. It only becomes hip hop when DJing is set, alongside another element in some particular way. So I just want to sort of sort of bring about the date that we do emphasize, because clearly on the title of the book it says a peace meeting, and that's what we mean by it, is December 8th, 1971 opens the doorway for all of these young people to be in one place and to be in one place safely. And I know you. One last question, right?
Who will ask the last question? You will ask the last question.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Elena. I also went to 145.
Nice.
I graduated from Joseph Pulitzer
Nice. You went to 145. Where?
Middle School in Jackson
Right,
Heights.
right, in Jackson Heights, yeah. So we went to the same junior high school.
Graduated 2003.
Wow. Damn,
So
that's so cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
no, I really appreciate everything you guys were sharing. Super inspiring. And I was wondering, like, based on everything that you are and experienced and feel, like, what does your intuition maybe say about the future of hip hop? Or like how with this political climate can possibly like continue to evolve?
I mean, when we see hip hop move, I mean, that's a whole nother book. You know, why does it take shape in LA, right? Is it when the factories started to close and black and Mexican workers no longer had that sort of, you know, income, you know? So, I mean, my point is that I'm getting to is hip hop begins to take root within areas of oppression in response to economic forces that are happening within a particular city. And so this is why we see it in East London and South London, but not in Central London or in West London by, you know, the king and queen. When we think about France, that's why we see it in Marseille and not in Paris. And if we do see it in Paris, we see it in the northern suburbs, right? This is why we see it in
Gaza?
In Gaza and the West Bank. I mean, literally, there were people, you know, videoing themselves breaking in the midst of the
Camp
rubble.
Breakers crew. Go on IG, Instagram, Camp Breakers with a Z crew. You'll see kids as young as 8 years old doing footwork. Footwork is described by a person, female or male, balancing themselves with their limbs, their hands, and then doing like a 360 with their feet. So think of a helicopter move, but you're doing all these intricate movements with your feet and legs. That's footwork, and it's a term that describes an aspect of b-boying in Gaza,
Yeah.
next to rubble.
Yeah, and so the last chapter gets into, you know, how it ends up going to, you know, in the early 80s, right? Fab Five Freddy sets up a tour of Rocksteady Crew and so forth to go
Ramel
to
Z.
Yeah, you know, and they were able to.
They go to Europe,
and
London.
and people see it, and who sees it though? I mean, everywhere hip hop starts in, it always starts in the same circumstances. Not to say that other people cannot sort of pick up on it. You know, the suburbs can pick up on it. People who are wealthy can pick up on it, but it never starts in those places. It always starts in a public housing unit or in the poorest neighborhood area of any particular city. And that's our argument, is that it's a sort of artistic expression of the living conditions, but also we need to think about what are the things that created the living conditions, and they consistently play out the same. So in terms of your question about the future, you know, when I look at how it's expressed, you know, in other parts of the world, you know, there's hope, because you sort of see it replicating some of the oldest traditions, you know, criticisms of economic circumstances. You know, all during COVID, we saw, you know, the rise of a lot of, you know, Indian MCs out of Mumbai, right? And we know of the sort of economic sort of divide in Mumbai, of all places, you know, and one of the artists, his video became like one of the biggest viewed hip hop videos, the one where there's all these cars that are driving around each other, and I forgot the name of the sort of sport, but basically they're literally driving horizontal to each other, you know, all in the video. And it wasn't like a professionally sort of like funded video. So the point is, it moves, and it moves to places, and it just automatically gets picked up by people who are trying to respond to their circumstances, and the circumstances have to be from particular type of forces that all come together to bear on top of those people.
Something that does concern me, as much as I agree with every single word Rasul just said, is that the aspect of technology can thwart the future of hip-hop from a perspective of pure organic hip-hop is an analog experience. I personally don't consider listening to AI rap in Notorious B.I.G.'s voice hip-hop. That's synthetic to me. Hip-hop is analog. It's grabbing Trans-Europe Express, right? And cutting it up, scratching it up, playing it on a turntable. If you're, I don't know, a DJ and you're DJing from your iPhone and you're, moving this dial with your index finger and you're this, I don't know, privileged kid, right? That thinks, I don't need to get turntables. I'm just going to, make this sound on my phone. That to me is synthetic. It's not organic, authentic hip hop. So when you factor in how technology is just taking over the way we experience the world, that does concern me. And going back to those kids, camp breakers in Gaza, there are no iPhones, there are no laptops anywhere in the vicinity of them breaking. It's them and rubble. It's no music, it's analog. It's the music is their bodies, right? And so, as Rasul said perfectly, in the future, moving forward, I think you will continue to experience hip-hop, but it's going to be in places that are challenged, and it's going to be from people that are oppressed, right? It's not going to be from like some privileged kid in his basement, in front of his computer making beats, I feel like that, to me, technology and how fast it's moving and just taking over the way we experience each other in the world, that does concern me with regards to the future of the culture. Because when you think about and read about in the city of hip-hop what gave birth the circumstances that pushed someone like Grandmaster Flash, who had a mic mixer because he was poor, couldn't afford an actual type of mixer that a DJ like Francis Grasso or Grandmaster Flowers was using in the discotheques, had a mic mixer with no headphone cue switch, went to a Radio Shack, bought the parts to build his own external cue switch so that he could listen to the next song that he was about to play. That is hip-hop. It's being resourceful, transforming one thing into another thing, a turntable into an instrument, right? A spray can that you're supposed to use to paint bookshelves into your brush and using it to paint on a train. Or the way we transform dress and fashion, like hip-hop is an organic analog experience, and I feel like technology threatens that. So yeah, the future is going to be super interesting for this culture to see where it goes as technology continues to grow. But there will always be DJs like me that are grounded and anchored by what the originators, the pioneers, the first generation breakers, DJs, MCs, graph writers did. They set the blueprint for this culture, and as long as hip-hop heads like myself are alive, you'll always see it in some way. Thank you. Steven, thank you so much to Word Bookstore for hosting this little book talk. I appreciate you, Steven.
Thank you.
Word.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you for coming, guys.
Rasul Mowatt and Rob Sweat.
Much love.
If anybody wants to buy the book, I'll sell it to you upstairs. You're under no obligation, but I'm sure the authors will sign it for you.
Word.
There you go.